It's 3 GMT, 11 p.m. in Washington, D.C., 6:30 a.m. in Tehran. If you're just joining us on Al Jazeera, I'm Fuli Batibo with our continuing extended coverage of the U.S. military strikes on Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump says American forces have conducted what he calls very successful strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. President Trump announced that a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan. In his address to the nation a short while ago, the U.S. president warned Iran not to retaliate, urging it to make peace. Otherwise, the U.S. will go after other targets. Trump says the objective of the strikes was to destroy Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and to stop any nuclear threat. He says all three facilities have been, quote, obliterated. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also spoken. He has thanked the U.S. for the strikes. Let's listen to what President Trump said in his address to the nation a short while ago.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisen-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Let's now bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, it was just about 48 hours ago that the president said he was weighing his options and giving himself about 2 weeks to decide whether the U.S. would intervene in the conflict. It's happened in 48 hours or so now. How is he justifying these strikes now?
Yeah, the U.S. president not giving a lot of justification beyond saying that he has eliminated the threat, and that the fact is that the United States was at risk simply because Iran has been for decades shouting death to America. But that is not going to sit well with the many of the president's political opposition, the Democrats in Congress. In fact, there's a statement that's just come out from Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She is a ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and she says that the U.S. president also did not brief members of Congress prior to taking action, something that has been a bipartisan tradition. She says that Americans will no doubt be ensuring more risk as a result of President Trump's actions, striking those 3 nuclear sites. Now, Foley, I can also tell you that we're getting a better sense of what some of the operation looked like. The bunker buster bombs that were used, there were, we understand, 30,000 those 30,000-pound bombs. 6 of them were dropped on Fordo, and the 30 Tomahawk missiles were used on the other 2 Iranian sites. Now, we also know that the U.S. president spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, prior as well as after the strikes by the United States on Iran took place. But we also know that the United States reached out to Iran. Typically does not have direct relations. However, we believe, and we're told that this was some sort of diplomatic message that was conveyed, that the United States says that just those 3 sites are what is in the battle plans, and they are not planning regime change.
I was going to ask you about that. In fact, I mean, this operation striking these 3 particular sites, is it a one-off? What are the Americans saying about what they might do next?
Well, we know that that is the intelligence that the U.S. president was requesting just a couple of days ago. On Thursday, to be specific, he was briefed and he was told that this is a possibility. We remember that the U.S. president has campaigned that he does not want to take the United States into these so-called forever wars. He was a heavy critic of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, as well as Joe Biden and his actions, withdrawal in Afghanistan. But what we know is that the U.S. president for his part, has now put the United States at risk of being subject to retaliation. The fact is that there are a tremendous number of U.S. troops, some 40,000 in the region. There are also, of course, the various bases in the region and the carrier strike groups and the aircraft. So there is the possibility of retaliation, even as the U.S. president has warned Iran against that.
You've told us already about some of the reactions there in Washington, Kimberly, and there were already divisions in Congress regarding the legality and necessity of the strikes, especially considering the War Powers Act. What's going to be the fallout from this politically? The president needs Congress to get the U.S. into war. There are exceptions, of course. And there was opposition even from some of the president's own supporters, some of the members of his MAGA movement.
Yeah, that's right. And the exceptions being that there's precedent that prior presidents have ignored the U.S. Constitution and have gone in unilaterally without the permission of Congress. But the U.S. Constitution is very clear that the only way the United States could take unilateral action, as the president and commander-in-chief has just done, is if there is an imminent threat to the United States. And the U.S. president did not outline that in his speech. He said that he had assisted Israel, but he did not say in any way that that there was any sort of imminent threat to the United States. So this is going to be something that will be heavily criticized by the U.S. president's, not only opposition Democrats, but as you point out, also members of his own party. In fact, Congressman Tom Massie, who is a Republican in the House of Representatives, has said since the strikes, responding to Donald Trump's Truth Social post about the announcement of the strikes on the 3 nuclear sites, this is not constitutional. Now, there are others in the party that will support this, including Senator Lindsey Graham. But again, the majority of the American public is not in favor of the action the president has just taken.
Right. And beyond the constitutionality of this, there is also the fact that President Trump had said all along that he didn't want the U.S. to be involved in any more wars in this region. He's gone against all of the things that he promised, really, regarding this during his campaign.
and that is going to affect him politically. We have the midterm elections that will be coming up. They happen 2 years after the presidential election, and already the United States Congress is a very thin majority for Republicans. There's no question that the U.S. president could pay for this politically come the midterm elections, but there's someone else that can pay for this politically, and that is the Vice President J.D. Vance. He was standing behind the U.S. president as he made this announcement and address to the American people from the entrance to the East Room of the White House. He is the one that is likely to take the baton, if you will, from Donald Trump, who cannot run for another term, and run for president. And he is also someone who, like Donald Trump, advocated for less intervention, U.S. intervention around the world. So now he is attached to this decision. He is part of this decision. And he is, in addition to the U.S. president, who we should point out could potentially even be impeached if the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives and have investigatory power. But there's no question that there is going to be political fallout for both Donald Trump and his vice president as a result of these actions.
Kimberly, thank you very much for the moment. That's Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent. Let's now take a closer look at the 3 Iranian nuclear sites that have been attacked by the U.S. The Fordo enrichment plant is estimated to be 80 meters underground. That's well out of reach of Israeli missiles and requires more advanced U.S. weaponry. Natanz is Iran's biggest nuclear site and can enrich uranium to 60%. It's also heavily fortified with underground infrastructure. Isfahan is another critical nuclear site, which is a uranium conversion plant. Let's go live now to our correspondent in the Iranian capital, Tauhid Asadi. Tauhid, good morning to you. Can you tell us about the initial reaction in Iran to the U.S. strikes and what the damage assessment is at this hour?
Well, actually, when it comes to the early reactions, we've got this statement from the Atomic Energy Organization of the country, and also another statement just came out a few minutes ago about this about actually the signs of contamination. They said that there is no sign of nuclear contamination as of date, according to their data. It's a statement that we heard from the Center for Nuclear Safety. Also, they said that there is no danger for people living in the nearby area. But speaking of a previous statement that we got from the Nuclear Energy or Atomic Energy Organization of the country, they confirmed that 3 nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, were targeted by the airstrikes of quote-unquote enemy. And also they said that that's a quite clear contradiction of international law, in particular NPT. Iran is a signatory of which, and also they said that IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, should be criticized for its indifference and quote-unquote even support as a result of which this recent strikes are taking place. And also they said that these sites, these places targeted, were under full inspection of IAEA, and that the national industry related to nuclear program of the country is not going to be stopped there. This is the very latest statement that we have from the Iranian side. We are still waiting. I'm sure that it doesn't answer the very fundamental question that is out there, which is how Iran is going to react right now.
Indeed.
For that, we are waiting for further military and political statements coming out, as this recent statement looks to be more technical, but we can
Let me ask
consider
you about
this bigger context in which Iran is saying,
and you are right to say that
decides to.
You are right to say that it's too early now for the political reactions because it's very early in the morning in Tehran. But just to recap what you were telling us, what we heard from the Iranian Atomic Agency is that no sign of contamination right now as a result of these 3 U.S. strikes on these 3 sites, and no danger for the people living around these sites. Which brings me to the question of whether there was any sort of preparations made by the Iranian authorities in anticipation of a potential U.S. strike on these sites. We have been talking for a number of days now about the Fordo plant. Were there preparations made to clear these sites, perhaps, in advance?
Yes, I can cite the same statement that came from the Center for Safety, Nuclear Safety of the country. They said that there was some preparation, and also initially we've got this report from IRIB, the state TV, claiming that no nuclear material, no dangerous material were there under the when these strikes took place. I'm sure that we have to keep waiting for further details, as still we don't have anything about damage assessment coming from the Iranian side. For that, we should keep waiting. But what we know is that based on what they have put out as a sort of a statement, we can rest assured that Iranians were sort of prepared for this, specifically after Donald Trump, the U.S. president, came out to say that there is a possibility for such a strike. And now, as I told you earlier, and as you mentioned, they're saying that for the people living nearby, there is no danger, according to the latest data. But still, we have to keep in mind that this is not the first time that Iran's nuclear facilities are being targeted. Previously, from day one of the Israeli strikes, Natanz was targeted for several times alongside with other nuclear facilities of the country. And from the Iranian side, what we are having at these over the past few days is that these centers were under full inspection of IAEA, and that is quite contradictory to the international law, as the statement coming from the Atomic Energy Organization of the country says. But speaking again of a broader context, we have to keep in mind that Iranians previously were saying that the United States is there to be blamed because it gave a sort of green light for the initiation of the Israeli strikes. And of course, they had a role there when it comes to the resolution that was adopted by the Board of Governors of IAEA. They're saying that this resolution was drafted and then supported by the United States and other three European countries. Also, we had this earlier warning, speaking of the response, something that is critically important at the time being.
Right. Tauheed, let me just ask you, let me jump in there and ask you about the options on the table now for Iran. Prior to the U.S. Attacking these three sites, the Iranian had warned against any U.S. intervention in the conflict between Iran and Israel. We are, of course, as you said, waiting for political reaction. But what might Iran do next? How will they respond to the U.S. entering the conflict?
Well, speaking of the details, so far Iranians have decided not to spill the beans about their plans, but the very gist of the matter was something that we heard from the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei when it comes to his very latest video statement that came out a couple of days ago. He said that the possibility of U.S. intervention runs the risk of quote-unquote irreversible damage, and he said that previously that is going to lead into escalation. And it was also Iranian president, Iranian foreign minister, they're all saying that this possibility, which is now getting translated into reality, runs the risk of dragging the entire escalation, which is already in an unprecedented level, to a next level, in which there is a possibility for a regional all-out war scenario that is a very dangerous scenario, according to Iranian officials. And Iranians are saying that we haven't prepared for this. We talked to one of military officials, security officials. He said that we haven't prepared for it in the last 10 years, and we are going to have no problem with prolonged war, according to this military official who told us about that possibility. The thing is that Iranians are prepared for that, but speaking of the reaction, they're saying that any American asset in the region is going to be a potential retaliatory target when it comes to Iranian response. But now that red line is crossed. American intervention, something Iranians were warning about, is there as a part of reality on the ground. But still, we have to keep waiting to see how Iran is going to formulate its response.
Okay, Tauheed, we will, of course, be checking in with you throughout the morning here when we get more reaction from Iran. Tauheed Assadi in Tehran there. Tauheed reminding us that the Iranian Atomic Agency has said there is no sign of contamination and no danger for the people living in the area of the 3 sites that were attacked by the United States, those 3 sites being Natanz, Isfahan and Fordo. And we're also hearing from regional nuclear agencies, the Saudi Nuclear and Radiological Regulatory Commission, saying no radioactive effects were detected on the environment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf states as a result of the U.S. military targeting Iranian nuclear facilities earlier today. Now, just before President Trump delivered his address, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a pre-recorded video statement on the U.S. strikes on Iran. He said history will record the U.S. acted to deny Iran the most dangerous of weapons. Take a listen.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
For more on this, let's bring in Hamda Salhout, who joins us from Jordan's capital, Amman. So the U.S. intervention is what Prime Minister Netanyahu had wanted all along, direct U.S. involvement in Israel's conflict with Iran. Talk to us more about what he said and the reaction from Israel.
Well, the Israeli prime minister actually released 2 statements. One of those statements just around 30 minutes ago in Hebrew, addressing the citizens of Israel, saying that on June 13th, Netanyahu promised that he would destroy Iran's nuclear program and capabilities, and saying that he kept that promise and that moving forward, Israel is going to continue with their attacks on Iran until they feel they have accomplished all of their goals since they started this all 10 days ago. But the reaction from Israel, keep in mind it's around 6:30 a.m. local time, but the reaction that has come out has been in support of this. Remember, it's what the Israelis had been wanting all along. There were private conversations happening behind the scenes since before this had even taken place, saying that the Israelis wanted American assistance in striking the Fordo nuclear facility in particular, because no Israeli weaponry could reach it because it's so far underground. So now that the Americans have responded and rather have conducted strikes of their own, the region is bracing for what sort of response there is going to be from the Iranians. Israel has now closed its airspace once again because in fear of any sort of retaliation from Iran. But nonetheless, the Israeli prime minister has been thanking President Trump, saying that this was a success.
What are Israel's objectives in this war with Iran? And do these U.S. strikes constitute, Hamda, an achievement in any way for Israel, where we could see the Israelis now back off and end their military operation against Iran?
Well, according to Israeli officials who've spoken to media this morning, they say that the attacks on Iran will certainly continue, that they are in no way finished, because they say that it's not only the nuclear facilities and nuclear capabilities that they were after, that's what they wanted to destroy, but they also want to destroy all of the ballistic missile capabilities, all of the drone capabilities, anything militarily now that the Iranians have, because they had retaliated and fired back at Israel after those initial attacks on June 13th, that's what they want to destroy. The military has said that this is going to be a prolonged campaign and that people in Israel should brace themselves for more attacks. And that was nearly 2 days ago. But the Israelis say that this was one of their big goals, was to eliminate Iran's nuclear capabilities. And Netanyahu says that that has now been accomplished. That has also been echoed by U.S. President Donald Trump. But again, there's a lot of fear as to what escalation this can cause in the region, because this is not just the Israelis now, this is the Americans getting involved. There are other regional actors who could potentially get dragged into this as well. So now Israel is looking to see what they are going to do next. There have been new guidelines from Homefront Command that have been issued inside of Israel. There have already been guidelines about limiting gatherings, limiting any sort of large crowds outside. And now they've closed schools. They have closed most workplaces. Only essential workers are allowed to leave. They're asking people to stay in safe rooms. There are a lot of people in Israel who have decided to live in these makeshift underground sort of shelters in mall parking lots and such. So the Israelis say that this is one large accomplishment, striking the Fordo plant, because again, they could not do that on their own. And they were hoping the United States would get involved, and they said they worked together in tandem on these attacks.
As you said, Hamda, fear of what might happen next now and how Iran will respond. But already in the last week, we've seen Iranian missile attacks in Israel, on Israel, targeting multiple sites, and you know, the damage, the scale of these attacks is unprecedented for Israel. Remind us of what the Iranians have been able to hit within Israel and the sort of psychological impact it's had on the Israeli population.
Well, the Israelis certainly underestimated what type of response they were going to get, because Israel, while it has a pretty ironclad defense system, it's certainly not foolproof. And there have been a lot of projectiles that have been able to bypass these air defenses and hit pretty strategic targets in Israel. That includes ones that are used by the government and the military, both in the north and the south, essentially paralyzing the country. The biggest shipping company in the world has said that they are no longer going to be sending their ships to Haifa. The airspace is closed. FedEx is no longer shipping to Israel. But that's just the business aspect of it. When it comes to the people themselves, people say that they are traumatized by what is going on, because they haven't really had this type of scale of damage in whatever war Israel has been involved in, because usually it's short-range projectiles that are launched that are pretty easily intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. But this time, that's simply not the case. You're looking at least 25 people in Israel who have been killed, hundreds of others injured, and not to mention the damage and destruction that has been done to areas in the north and the south and in the central part of the country, like Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Hamda, for that. Hamda Salhout in Amman, Jordan, for us with the latest reaction there from Israel. Now, let's look at how President Trump announced those U.S. strikes on Truth Social just before midnight GMT. He said, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There's not another military in the world that could have done this," he says. "Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Let's bring in now Sina Azodi, an assistant professor of Middle East politics at George Washington University, who focuses on Iranian foreign policy. His live from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us on Al Jazeera, Sina. Your thoughts first, and you know, on what's happened. How do you view this U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict and the U.S. president's justification for entering the war?
Well, first of all, let me just say that, you know, this makes Iran the only country in the world that has been targeted by 2 nuclear weapon states at the same time. We also have to keep in mind that the U.S. president's decision, according to his own Republican supporters, was an unconstitutional decision to attack the country. It also violates the NPT. And I think that it fundamentally changes the U.S.-Iranian relations for the years to come. It could potentially have an impact on the non-proliferation regime in the long term. And what I mean by that is that Iranians could finally come to the conclusion that remaining in the NPT no longer serves their interests, and become, after North Korea, become the second country that leaves the non-proliferation regime.
Iran, prior to this attack by the United States, had already warned against any U.S. intervention in the conflict. It had threatened that it would retaliate. What are Iran's options right now after what's happened today? Will it pursue a measured counterstrike, or are you seeing a broader escalation here?
Well, based on Iran's behavior in the past, I think we should expect a response, a counterattack by Iran with loudest political message with minimum potential casualties. Because if there are potential casualties, American casualties, the U.S. president will respond, and it could potentially lead to a full-scale confrontation between Iran and the United States. And this is something that President Trump has repeatedly said that he wants to avoid. He criticized former presidents George W. Bush, Obama, and Biden for getting the U.S. involved in perpetual wars in the region. So, and he has said that I'm the president of peace. And he certainly doesn't want to be the president who started yet another war in the region, especially with Iran, which is much larger than Iraq, has a much larger population, and it could not be as easy as Iraq. And we saw what happened in the Iraq case.
All right. Sina Azodi, stay with us. I'm going to bring in Abbas Aslani, who's joining us from Tehran. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thank you, Abbas, for being with us. Your thoughts about what's happened, and is there a scenario here in which Iran can respond to these U.S. attacks without escalating the situation further?
Well, I think a response from Iranian side seems certain. It could be maybe three scenarios. One could be the limited reaction, depending on the size of the damage. But let's not forget that in addition to the attack to the nuclear facilities, this is U.S. direct entry into the war with Iran. So Iran had earlier warned that it will respond to this, action. But the second scenario could be a full-scale war, Iran trying to engage in serious, let's say, attacks against U.S. interests as well as the Israeli ones. This could include a wider scope of targets, which Iran can reciprocate similar, targets in Israel by going after Israeli nuclear sites, as was stated earlier. And allies of Iran could join this, conflict. And Iran has levers like in the Strait of Hormuz to close and to block the transit of energy in the region. This could have repercussions not just for the regional security, but for global energy and market as well. But scenario could be a combination of the previous ones. It could be a hybrid one. Iran can start, responding against U.S. interests as well as Israelis. But this could escalate to, let's say, further conflict and serious ones. Whether this will, expand into a full-scale war, it will depend on both sides and the role that other third parties and countries can play in this regard.
Sina Azodi, let me ask you about what Abbas Aslani said there. He thinks that this could lead to a regional escalation. Is there a scenario where we could see Iran's allies in the region, the Yemen's Houthis, for example, who had until now, at least for the past 10 days, not been fully engaged anyway in the Israeli-Iranian conflict? Are we likely to see Iran's allies in the region now enter the fray?
Certainly. It is not 100%, but surely Iranians can ask them to start attacking potentially American interest, Israeli interest. But we also have to keep in mind that the Houthis signed their own ceasefire with the United States.
Exactly.
I don't know if the Houthis would be willing to jeopardize it, but absolutely there's a possibility they could start attacking Israeli ships or any ships that goes towards is inbound for Israel or outbound. It really depends on the Houthis' thinking, but we also have to, again, keep in mind that Houthis are more independent from Iran than other regional friends that Iran has.
Gentlemen, stay with me, both of you, Harlan Abbas Aslani and Sina Azodi. Stay with me. I'm going to bring in Harlan Ullman into the conversation to get the U.S. perspective on all of this. He's a political and military analyst, chairman of the Kilowan Group, and a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, joining us from Washington, D.C. I wanted to get your thoughts first, Harlan, on President Trump's justification of these attacks on Iran. He said that the U.S. was at risk of an imminent attack of from Iran. Do you believe that?
No. And I think what President Trump decided was that this was an optimum time. I think that the intelligence community was correct in that there's no evidence that Iran is moving to develop a weapon, but it certainly has done things to move in that direction. And given what Israel has done in terms of disarming much of Iran, I think the president felt that having given warnings to Iran, now was the time to act. I think in his view, he believes that there's one deft strike who's going to be able to produce a peace agreement, or at least a negotiation. This is the way Donald Trump thinks. And I'm afraid that's not going to be the case. As I said earlier this evening, I'm afraid that this is going to be the beginning and not the end of these issues. And I can almost guarantee you tomorrow, Iran will present evidence that the Fordo installation was not badly damaged as the Americans think. And the press conference that will be given tomorrow morning, American time, with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, will show how much damage has been done and that the Iranian program has been set back years, possibly. The fact of the matter is, I don't think anybody will really know the extent of the damage in the United States, but this leaves open the door to a great deal of potential escalation. And one of the areas of escalation that has not been mentioned is that Iran has a very powerful cyber capacity. And I would expect cyber attacks to be breaking out. They'll be done clandestinely and overtly. But the fact of the matter is they can do a huge amount of damage. And that's one area I would look to see Iran starting almost immediately.
Abbas Aslani in Tehran, let me ask you about that, and also about the damage at these three sites that the U.S. attacked, Fordo, Isfahan, and the third one. It'll come back to me in a second. But were there any preparations that were made prior to Natanz, prior to the U.S. intervention? Because there had been, of course, rumors all week long that the U.S. might get involved in the conflict and might help the Israelis attack Fordo, for example. Were there any plans made by the Iranian authorities to perhaps clear these sites ahead of any U.S. intervention?
Well, yes, because this didn't, caught Iran by surprise, and that's why, a few days earlier, Iran was expecting such kind of action taking place from the U.S. side. So that's why they had some precautionary measures and arrangements, and they had, transferred those nuclear material in order to avoid radiation and contamination, specifically for those who are residing near to those facilities. And we have been hearing from Iranian officials that, those measures had been done in order to make sure that no damage will be done to those people living around, or in the vicinity of those nuclear facilities or close and nearby. And also there have been some, reports or comments from local officials. They have been saying that the damages, specifically in Fordo, have not been that significant as portrayed by U.S. president. They are saying that it has been, somehow damages in the surface or the entrance of the facility, which could be repairable. Fordo has been a, heavily protected and fortified underground nuclear facility. Penetrating to that facility could be, difficult. It may delay the progress and development in that facility, but comparing to that facility, Natanz and Isfahan could be, let's say, much more accessible. the amount and the extent of the damage to Natanz and Isfahan, I think, is being investigated. We have no, detailed information and precise one on those two nuclear facilities. But all in all, this may not end the nuclear industry in the country. This is what is being said by the Atomic Energy Organization in the country, as well as officials. They are saying that you cannot kill the knowledge, even by killing scientists or, bombing nuclear facilities. And this may, strengthen the resolve in the country in order to continue to develop the nuclear, program.
Sina Azodi, your thoughts about what Abbas Aslani was saying there. I mean, the Iranians would have made preparations ahead of any U.S. attack. In terms of what happens next, we've talked about the possible scenarios here. Harlan believes that this could escalate and that we're not going to see just a one-off with this operation, that this might be a bigger U.S. intervention. Is that how you see things evolving as well within the next few days?
Well, yes, I agree. And unfortunately, the president has not left Iranians with much of a choice, a safe phasing ramp, because of the way he spoke to Iranians, because of the mere strike on the Iranian homeland by the United States. Iranians will be forced to respond. But as I discussed, there are three main options that Iranians have. And absolutely, I think it has the capacity to escalate into a broader conflict in the region, which would drag the U.S. In another war. And this is something that the Prime Minister of Israel has always wanted to do it.
Harlan, dragging the U.S. into another war in the region is what President Trump said he was not going to do. What do you think led him to this decision today? Was it Israeli pressure? I mean, if we could describe it, pressure, or Israeli influence, non-stop Israeli influence on him? What led him to basically go against what many in his party had not wanted? They didn't want to get involved in further wars in the region. What do you think it is that led him to make this decision today?
I think it's very straightforward. Nobody wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon. The question was, how do you deal with that? Did you do that through diplomacy? And of course, Trump abrogated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action when he became president the first time. And it seems to me that's what put us on this course, because I think that the JCPOA would have was working. Having said that, the president probably decided that this was an opportunity to use American power, and I think he really believed that by attacking Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan, he could really set the program back and then leave it up to the Israelis to finish off what needs to be done.
But the reason I asked that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Harlan, is that it seems that his stance on Iran has constantly evolved. The goalposts kept moving. He wanted to give diplomacy a chance. There were indirect negotiations going on. He said no nuclear enrichment for weapons program, but then it changed. What led to the goalposts moving constantly?
You're making a mistake. Donald Trump has no goalposts. There's nothing by which you can measure him. Okay. And I believe that he felt that this was an opportunity right now to strike, that Iran had been weakened by Israel. He did not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon and felt, I can do it, and the attack will provide so much shock and awe that Iran will be forced to negotiate, and I'll win a Nobel Prize. I don't know about the Nobel Prize, but I do think he thought this would be sufficient and that American power would be enough to deter any retaliation on the part of Iran. That's the bet he's taken. It's not a bet I would take. We'll see what's happening in the future, but my guess is it's not going to turn out as the president expected. I hope it does. But I think those chances are between slim and none, because Iran will do something, it will escalate, and we'll see how far that escalation goes.
Sina Azodi, your thoughts about what Harlan said there, that Donald Trump really had no goalposts and that diplomacy wasn't going to work because eventually what he wanted was to attack Iran. Do you share that view?
Well, I don't think that he really wanted to attack Iran. I think his instinct was to get a deal and potentially go for and claim that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think that he was under pressure by the neocons and Prime Minister's supporters in the U.S. And I think at some point he lost his grip and control over the events, meaning that he tried to get a deal, but under the pressure of Prime Minister Netanyahu's friends in the U.S., I think he was forced to back down from the deal and then to say that he solved the problem, he went back to using the military option. But what I do want to emphasize is that, look, you can destroy the facility, but once you have the capacity and industrial know-how of rebuilding those facilities, Iran can always reconstitute the program, which raises another question. Is the U.S. are the Americans going to attack Iran every 6 months, every year to prevent it from reconstituting its program? That's a question that I don't know the answer to. Will President Trump be willing to commit the United States to a far larger conflict in the region? These are the questions that we don't know the answer to.
Abbas Aslani, your thoughts about what we've heard there from both Harlan and Sina Zodi, and also, I guess, you being in Tehran, perhaps get a sense of how the Iranian public is perceiving this current conflict with Israel, and now also the Americans entering it, in light of the economic strain that they've been experiencing in recent years and the risks of this becoming now a wider regional war. How is the Iranian public perceiving all of this?
Well, it seems that this is not about an end game, but setting the stage and, paving the way for a new course. This will impact different calculations here in Tehran. When it comes to the nuclear program, this might impact Iran's cooperation with the IAEA, or let's say rethink its, policies when it comes to the nuclear program. So far, we have no confirmation on that. What we should be expecting such kind of, let's say, changes down the road. But about the feeling here in Tehran, specifically among the public, they were waiting for such kind of possibility, and I was being asked questions in the past few days that whether the U.S. will engage in, this conflict or not. So this is not coming as a shock to them, but, there's expectation also for Iranian response to such kind of U.S. Direct engagement in war with Iran. And now the question has been shifted. What kind of reaction will Iran will have to this, aggression? Right. And this, in addition to the short-term, let's say, impacts, this could have longer-term ones, which is very significant. And we have to be watching how things will proceed, not just in the coming days or weeks, but in coming years.
In the short term, how have Iranians been impacted by what's happened over the last week, the war with Israel and the constant Israeli attacks on not just military sites, but also civilian sites in Iran? And what sort of preparations have people been making, if any, in anticipation of a bigger conflict?
Initially, and maybe before this aggression, many thought outside Iran and many maybe inside the country thought that such kind of aggression would, provoke people to come to the streets to, protest against the government establishment. Maybe this was a calculus in Tel Aviv and Washington. But in practice, what happened here in Tehran and other cities across the country, it united people, against an external enemy or threat. And we are seeing that different walks of lives and different political factions, or those who have been even critical of the government and the system, they have been united, for a decisive response, in the past days against Israeli aggression. And this might change into, let's say, response against American one. So this has turned out to be, making the people rally around the flag. And this will, help the government, and this will decrease the chance of a regime change in the country, and this somehow will have maybe benefits in the long term for the government in terms of, having the backing of the population for its policies.
Abbas Aslani, your thoughts are rallying around the flag in Iran. Sina, your thoughts. Abbas talks there about rallying around the flag in Iran. This is not what the U.S. would have wanted. We could be in a Iraq, similar scenario as in Iraq and Afghanistan here.
Well, I think that, in terms of rallying around the flag, I think Abbas is right. Iran is a very proud nation. And in the face of foreign aggression, Iranians tend to come together. But I also think at the same time that President's remarks and the way he delivered the remarks were, in a sense, adding insult to the injury, the way he spoke after the attacks.
Yeah.
But
he almost made it sound like a mission accomplished, didn't he? When he said, we have successfully done this, it's done. It almost sounded like it was, in his mind, perhaps just a one-off operation.
Yes, and I agree with you. But in every game of chess, the other side always gets a turn. Now we don't know how Iranians will respond. As I said, they have, 3 options that they might choose to pick. But at the same time, I do want to point out that Iran is not Iraq and Afghanistan. Iran is a much larger country, is a nation state which has historically preserved its national cohesion in face of foreign aggression. So we really have to wait and see how Iranians will respond to this. But I will not be surprised if President Trump brings Iranians inside the country together because of what just happened and the violation of Iran's sovereignty.
Yeah, I guess the parallels that have been drawn in the past week with Iraq and perhaps Afghanistan to an extent is the way that it's happened, the justification of entering the conflict, the justification that Iran has nuclear weapons and therefore we have to go in and bomb Iran, which was the same as with Iraq, of course, and those infamous weapons in 2003. Harlan, do you share what we heard there previously about the fact that this situation cannot be compared with Iraq and Afghanistan because Iran is a completely different nation and, of course, the scenarios are also different in terms of how they will respond? What are your thoughts about the parallels between Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, the parallels are simply that America did not have sufficient knowledge and understanding of what was happening in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I would argue that the United States, in this case, probably did not have full understanding of what's happening in Iran, believing that Iran was closer to developing a nuclear weapon than it really was, and that forced the action. So I think in terms of the American response, the parallels certainly with Iraq are very, very real, even though the differences between Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran are huge. But I'm afraid that we've opened Pandora's box here, and I think that the comment made that President Trump was presenting sort of a mission accomplished speech rather than speaking to the Iranian people, saying the attack was against the government to help you was a big mistake. But make no mistake here, there's euphoria in the White House because I think right now the White House believes that this has been a daring attack. Remember, it's only 30 Tomahawk missiles and 3 B-2 bombers with some escorts and refuelers. I mean, this is not exactly the Battle of Britain. And so I think there's been an over-exaggeration of what this has really done. And that, unfortunately, exacerbates the hubris and arrogance here. And I'm afraid it puts us in a bad position. As I said, I hope I'm wrong. You have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I think we put ourselves on a slippery slope. And as I said earlier, I do not see the exit strategy for the United States, Iran, or Israel until we find one. I'm very, very worried that this could escalate. I'm not saying it will, but I'm very worried until we can find a way out of this mess. And quite frankly, there may not be an obvious one.
All right, gentlemen, Sina and Abbas, let me get a final thought from both of you. What's the way out of this mess, as Harlan says there? And what is the way forward? Are we going to see an escalation or perhaps a more measured response from Iran?
Well, I would say, well, first of all, it's very complicated. I hope that Iran chooses a measured response, because I don't think that Iranians can sit around and not to respond at all. I don't think they have a way out of this. But I hope, for the sake of regional security and stability and preserving civilian lives, I hope that the Iranian response is measured and aimed at reducing casualties. And it is very serious. If there are American casualties in the region, I'm afraid that the president would retaliate by escalating, and then Iran will be forced to take a further retaliatory response. And we will be, before we know it, we're going to be in a serious regional conflict that we didn't expect only a few months ago.
All right, Abbas Aslani in Tehran, I'll give you the final word for this hour. You're in Tehran. How do you gauge the situation? Where do you see this conflict headed?
Yes, as I think earlier Sina said, Iran has no option but to respond against this. No response is not an option now because, you know, in the absence of any reaction to this aggression, this will be inviting further and additional attacks against the country. So Iran, in order to stop this process, will have to respond against this in order to establish a deterrence. But depending on the quality of the response, whether it's a limited one or a tough one or a middle ground, this will define the course ahead. But, you know, Iran's response is inevitable, but this might escalate into a, let's say, situation whereby the both sides, you know, continue this conflict. And this might risk expansion into the region, you know, so depending on the actions and reactions by the two sides. And let's not forget that the role by third parties will be also determining the process. They could be playing a role. So far, we have not been seeing that visible. And from Tehran's perspective, the recent talks in Geneva were supposed to be acting as a cover for this attack that was coming from the American side. So we are not expecting much from the Western side. We have to be seeing other powers, how do they, you know, react to this. But, you know, the risk of escalation yet exists, and this is not the end yet.
There is a risk of escalation indeed. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Sina Assodi, Abbas Aslani, and Harlan Ullman, thank you as we continue to cover this breaking news story. And the United States attacking Iran today. 3 military strikes in Iran by the United States, which President Donald Trump described as very successful. 3 strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. And as we've been discussing with our guests, everyone now waiting to see what the Iranian response will be to these U.S. attacks. The U.S. had already been shifting its military resources in the Middle East in response to the escalation, the recent escalation between Israel and Iran. Our defense editor, Alex Katopoulos, takes a look at American assets in the region.